So let's take a look at a few of the most successful lists in Warhammer 40K, with a roundup of armies that have won enormous tournaments since the balance update. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're doing a roundup of a whole bunch of army lists that have won Warhammer tournaments of ridiculous size, showcasing what a few of the best players around are choosing to put in their armies to take victories. It's now been around about 2 months since the last balance update, lots of points changing for a whole bunch of armies, and a few minor rules revisions. Currently in-game balance really doesn't seem to be doing too badly, though there are a few outliers that seem to be a little on the weak or a little on the strong side. I think it's always interesting to take a look at what's doing well at the absolute top levels of play though, and grand tournaments often tend to be a good place to showcase that, seeing as to take podium spots against events you have to beat very good players in the game over and over again. So it near enough guarantees that you both need a completely optimised army list and also to be capable of playing it incredibly well, and likely just a little bit of good luck along the way along with that, as you'll be playing against lots of people who are trying to do the same. Top level 40k is definitely a very different beast to what most people wind up playing, and it's certainly worth bearing in mind that people will be tailing to certain metas, tournaments and missions and everything, and player skill is more important than faction choice in the current game, but it's still interesting to take a look in and see what people are using to win these massive events. With that in mind, I thought we'd take a look at 7 armies that won a grand tournament of around 100 people or more, so really the biggest of the biggest over the past few weeks since the points update. Taking a look at the armies and the units chosen, and in general focusing on one army per faction, though I'll mention the others that also won tournaments of a similar sort of level. Jumping straight into it, and first up we have a Chaos Demons list by Nicholas Fritchen, who used this army to take first at Raccoon Rumble, 6 wins and no losses in an almost 200 player tournament. In general, for game wins and things, Demons have been doing fairly well since the balance update, generally with win rates above 50%. They're not actually topping tournaments quite as often as other things, though they're certainly able to take down this event. In this list we've got Be'lakor to shroud everything from being shot at long range, plus providing his Shadow of Chaos bubble to allow close range deep strikes. There's Shalaxi Hellbane that went down in cost in the last balance update, a really fast moving melee threat that can kill most things in the game and is particularly good against tough vehicles and monsters. A lot of change with the Rod of Sorcery for some nice magical firepower, and cool to see Kairos Fateweaver here as well. I feel like I've not seen him quite as much as some of the other greater demons. He's got a chance to farm stratagems and also has one of those stratagem debuff auras, plus being fairly threatening with his own flavour of magical firepower. Perhaps the most interesting thing is not to see the Great Unclean one with the 4+ Feel No Pain here, as he seems to be in the vast majority of competitive demons lists. In any case, to support them, there's some durable horrors and plague bearers, which will be good for objectives. The plague bearers have their sticky objectives rule. For swooping around the board, perhaps doing secondaries and things, we've got some screamers. I guess they could also do Shadow of Chaos things with the 2 Zinch bubbles that you have for that. A unit of Seekers for some fast moving scouting and can do move block things, and a unit of Nurglings that could infiltrate or deep strike for other certain positional secondaries. There's finally the Changeling for a Zinch lone operative. In any case, lots of big stat lines. Demons often feel kind of spooky to play against, given the big stats with the invulnerable saves, and the ability to warp things off the board and close range deep strike them if needed. Plus Be'lakor stopping most of the army from being shot early in the game if you happen to be fighting against a gun line. Next up, we've got the Orks, and it seems that the army list that's won the single biggest tournament since the update is this Green Tide list by John Holbrook, placing first at the Utah Open, winning 6 games and losing none at a 97-player grand tournament. It's pretty fun to see a win with Green Tide here, given that it's really not that commonly played compared with the other Ork detachments. Warhorde is the most common, then Bully Boys and Dreadmob, though Green Tide did get some nice direct buffs with the boys getting cheaper. I guess that'd be pretty directly some more points for those lists if you were spamming over 100 of them, as most Green Tides would be. The detachment rule was altered a bit in the last balance update. It's now a 5+ invulnerable save if you've got 10 or more boys, and only a 6+ if there's less than 10. The rerolls that they used to have are gone, but do have some nice horde supporting stratagems, regenerating models, full wound rerolls against the right targets, and a surge move type rule that means they can be hard to shoot off objectives. Most of those revolve around just the boys datasheet, and there's 5 units of 20 of them with choppers, power claw and a couple of rockets, and then 1 unit of 10. It looks like that unit might be going up in the truck. I wonder if they're with a war boss, given that their war ability can now take effect when they're in the truck. In any case, that's a ridiculous amount of OC2 bodies to chew through, all with invulnerable saves. There's 3 Pain Boys giving out their 5+ Feel No Pains, plus the ability to mess with enemy infantry in a big way. One has Bloodthirsty Belligerence, which is the one that allows you to re-roll advance and potentially charge rolls. There's also 2 Weird Boys to jump the boys around the board. One of them takes a command point farming one. And then for some objective support, there's 2 units of 11 Gretchen, which can also farm command points, 2 units of 5 Storm Boys, which can jump around doing secondaries as needed, and then 2 units of 10 Commandos, which also went down in the last points update. These really feel like they could be incredibly bad news for an enemy army that's trying to win the points game against the boys. It might be hard to dislodge this many boys if they make it to the midfield, but 2 units of commandos right in the middle of the board at the start of the game is going to make that hard, particularly if the Orks go first, and they could even do first turn charges or move block things if they really wanted to. Just having a bunch of violence ready to countercharge though isn't exactly the worst thing from the start of the game. In any case, still seems that boys on foot can get a lot of work done. Next up, and by the numbers, the Genestealer Cults do seem to be the single strongest faction in 40k at the moment, a win rate that's well clear of any of the others, and also proportionately winning more tournaments than any other faction, at least relative to the small number of people that play them. There's a few examples of events that fit the criteria for this video, but the most recent one was this one by Ben Jones, who used this army to take first at the Leicester 40k Super Major, with an undefeated run of 7 games in a massive 186 player tournament. The Biosantic Brood Surge is the big melee Genestealer Cult one, where Aberrants, Pure Strains and Biophagus led units all get +1 to charge and +1 attack when they make a charge. And there's some good stratagems to help them out against monsters and vehicles, boost the charge further to make some really quite reliable ones out of Deep Strike, and a few other fun melee tricks. For the core melee damage dealers here, there's 3 units of 5 Aberrants, 1 big unit of Pure Strains and 2 small ones. I guess the big one might be led by the Patriarch with a Biomorph adaptation, which turns them from maybe being a little bit on the tame side to having some big hitting AP3 and damage 3 attacks. And again, Patriarch's got a fair bit cheaper in the last update. There's also 2 big units of hybrid Metamorphs with Hand Flamers. They can strike out with a whole bunch of strength 5 damage 2 attacks or go for sweep mode ones. It looks like they'd be led by the Biophaguses to allow the detachment special rules to take effect on them, giving you some maybe slightly fragile but incredibly punchy melee units. Beyond that, there's 3 Abominants, which could be leading the Aberrants, though I've seen people use them just completely independently as well, just as annoying regenerating things that'll stand back up when they die. A Clamavus for some 12-inch Deep Strike denial, a Lone Operative cheap Sanctus, which can be handy enough to have around for utility things, some Auto-Pistol Acolytes that could farm some command points on a home objective perhaps, and some Neophytes for some sticky objectives as well. Finally, there's 2 of the auto-include Achilles Ridge Runners with a mortar each and a spotter to hand out some extra AP, and a Goliath truck that could transport some of the melee heavy hitters. Seems like there'd be good options as to what you put in there, whether it was Aberrants or the Metamorphs perhaps. Again, tons of stuff coming on, lots of it can deep strike, and lots of it can just return to reserve once it's killed and come straight back at you. Cult Ambush can be pretty terrifying on wiping a unit, as it could just get thrown straight back into the fight next turn. Genestealer Cults certainly have been having a rather good time of it though, for a couple of other 100+ player events that have been won by them. There's a Host of Ascension that was used by Innes Wilson to take the Celtic Cup. That one looked like some incredibly scary Horde-style Genestealer Cults, 100 Neophytes that could put out some serious damage with the detachment rule, 1 squad with a Benefactus, and 1 squad with a Primus and Chink in their armour for some extra damage, plus loads of objective scoring Handflamer Acolytes, and all supported by some Achilles Ridge Runners and more characters. There was also a list that won a tournament called the Alliance Open. That one a big 137 player one, a Dinoco going 6-0 at that one. That was kind of similar to the choices made in the previous Biosantic one, but dropping one of those blocks of Metamorphs for a bunch more Ridge Runners. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to the channel's affiliate discount retailers, a set of 5 gaming stores around the world that have the normal offering of cheaper models than buying through the Games Workshop web store. Lots of good examples out there of course, they're the ones linked in the video description that also help support Auspex Tactics if you buy anything after clicking those links. There's Element Games for 15 to 20% off in the UK, Gap Games for 21% off in Australia, Fenris Workshop for 10% in Canada, Wargame Portal for 15% in the USA, and Tash and Geldeep for 16% in the EU. If you were picking up any models in the near future, you could consider using one of those if you'd like to, and a big thank you to anyone who does choose to support the channel that way. Next up, we've got the other big bad of the meta with the Astra Militarum. The Imperial Guard having really quite a good time of it at the moment, as the single faction that's won the most big tournaments out there, and also has one of the very highest win rates too. This army list was by Tim Nordin, who used it to take first at a Fantasia Fnatic Grand Tournament of 99 players. Guard lists seem to be really quite freeform and doing well with all sorts of things, though this one goes heavy on the Rogal Dawns. No less than 3 of the things for a great big mighty source of damage that are really quite hard to take out. A huge amount of wounds and a cancelled damage ability. These ones take an Oppressor Cannon, Pulverizer Cannon, Multi-Melters, Melter Gun, and they even get their Multi-Melter and Stubber on top of that. Very efficient data sheets, even more so when buffed. To support these guys, we've got Lord Solar and a Command Squad combo. attached together via an infantry squad and able to broadcast orders to them, plus the ability to get them reroll ones to hit with scout sentinels, and maybe fields of fire for some extra AP, which could be handed out for a cheap discount from the mortar from the infantry squad here, plus Ursula Crees. They're going to be very hard to deal with and should inflict some massive pain on whatever they target. Then to take the midfield, there's a squad of 6 Borgrin with the invulnerable shields and mauls, still seemingly very viable despite the massive points increase they took. They also like Lord Solar's orders too. There's a big tough Deathcore of Krieg block with a 5+ feel no pain from the Marshal, 2 Kaschan jungle fighter units that could scout, and then a whole bunch of Scions dropping in, 2 squads of the ever-present Tempestus Aquilons, as a 90.3-inch deep strike unit with that much damage is just an auto-take. They could also be recycled with the reinforcement stratagem, and then also a Militarum Tempestus command squad attached to a Scion squad, this one going for Vox Med Pack and Plasma Gun, and a command squad on the commander. Overall looks like a very nicely balanced infantry support package for some massive guns in those Rogue Dawns. Should be able to score a whole load of points, while also having a good chance at winning the firepower game. Again, I'll mainly focus on one list per faction, but the other Astra Militarum army that won a massive tournament was this one by Nassim Falchain, winning the Coventry GT of 144 players. Overall, I feel like this one's probably got more similarities than differences. A very similar sort of infantry support package, lacking Ursula Creeds, taking a few more Borgrins and some Ogrins, but rather than Triple Dawn, it's going for 2 battle tanks, an Exterminator, a tank commander with a Demolisher and a Hellhound, still giving a bunch of really scary guns, plus the ability to debuff things with the Exterminator and the Hellhound too. Next up, there's an Imperial Knight list that took down a great big tournament in France called the Open de Occitanie, played by someone called Asteel, who used it to take 5 wins and no losses at a tournament of 120 players or so. Knights perhaps tend to have a little bit more success on average at sort of medium to smaller events compared with big ones, but every so often they still break through. Their win rate numbers are still fine. It looks like the list that was used to take down this big tournament was a fairly straightforward one. Canis Rex leading 10 armigers, 5 Helverins with the autocannons and the anti-fly things, and 5 Warglaves with the big melters, fairly general purpose melee, and they're taking melter guns on top besides one of them. Knights have generally felt like they're in a fairly good place. Plenty of the big ones are viable and are a bit more interesting now they've got the option to break through walls. Canis Rex still seems like one of the best of them despite his points increase. All those free stratagems on top of his good shooting and good melee are hard to pass up. The armigers are generally quite good in Pariah Nexus missions, having more of them with the ability to do actions, plus having a load of battle line is kind of helpful in some games. The Warglaves will be fairly scary to enemy Terminator equivalents that might rely on things like stacking armour of contempt saves, and just quite good against tanks in general. The Helverins are generally quite good against most things unless it's got some seriously high armour saves, and are particularly good against anything with fly when they can trigger those rules, being a little bit unusually efficient against things like Catan. Then finally there's a Calidus Assassin for jumping around the board, scoring secondary objectives, often a pretty good support piece for 100 points for a knightly army. Next up, we've got the Ultramarines Vanguard list that won the first really big tournament after the balance update. Space Marines in general still have lower win rates than most, though in reality it feels like a bit of a split between Ultramarines and everyone else. It does seem like they've managed to win a good number of grand tournaments, plenty of them using a newer, cheaper Guilliman, though for this one it was the tried and tested combo of Marlius Calgar and Uriel Ventris, who also got a perhaps unneeded glow up with the -1 command point debuff. For this one it's Calgar with an Apothecary and the Blade Driven Deep Infiltrate enhancement, leading a big unit of Eradicators for a terrifying threat in the mid-board that can both handle itself really quite well at range and in melee. Uriel Ventris lending his deep strike skills as usual to a unit of Centurion Devastators with las cannons, enormous firepower that can take out most normal sized targets, and the ability to return to reserve for a command point at the end of each turn if they won't have anything to draw a line of sight on in the next one. Uriel himself would join some company heroes, and interestingly enough it looks like Cato Sicarius was joining the other one. I believe discussion at the time said that he was joining an Impulsor in the shield dome to allow it to scout onto the mid-board for just an annoying tanky unit with some reactive move skills. That was quite fun to see, given that Cato Sicarius hasn't really been in many army lists in 10th edition in general. Besides that, there's a whole bunch of Inceptors, 6 with Plasma and 3 with Bolters, again nice in Vanguard, with the ability to return to reserve if they need to, 5 Infiltrators that can deny deep strike to the home field, 2 sets of 5 Scouts to contest the midfield and maybe return to reserve, and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant to do lone operative things, and he takes Shadow War Veteran, the command point debuff one, so you could potentially have really quite a lot of the board where your opponent will be paying more command points for their stratagems than normal between him and Ventris. Overall, a whole ton of big scary threats there, and some serious disruption with things warping around the board and debuffing stratagems all over the place. Finally, last but most certainly not least, was Folger Pals' World Champions of Warhammer winning Custodes army list, which, as well as being the big Central Games Workshop tournament, certainly feels like the single biggest and most important tournament out of any. 268 players and all of those grand tournament winners, and a long and grueling tournament over 3 days to play against them all, and managing to take a win with the Adeptus Custodes, which again really don't tend to get all that many victories at a top meta kind of level. I talked about this one in a video focusing on it, but it was interesting to see the use of the Talons of the Emperor detachment, the one for the Sisters plus Custodes, a bit of extra defense against mortal wounds and things, but also just some really nice stratagems. A big reactive move of 6 inches is kind of massive on an enormous value Custodes squad. The shooting stratagem can be scary enough with Kyria Draxus' units. Fall back and shoot and charge keeps things very flexible. And there's a +1 to wound against tough stuff if a squad desperately needs to take one thing down. The core of the list is 3 scary blade champions with big melee stats and the advance and charge thing, leading 3 units of wardens with their -1 to wound and their massive turn of feel no pain. They do feel like the most obvious big damage dealers and defense units of the codex right now. Kyria Draxus can shield a unit of Custodian Guard from being shot at long range, and between their special rules it makes her shooting just ridiculously savage for how much they cost. There's 2 sets of 4 Witch Seekers and a set of 4 Prosecutors for the Sisters of Silence to run around doing objectives. The Witch Seekers can ride up in a Psychana Rhino, and then there's a pair of Caladius Grav tanks with the heavy blaze cannons, providing some seriously quality anti-tank in the backfield. The Custodes smash their way through a whole bunch of different armies on their way to the top, with the final game against John Lennon's Astra Militarum, with the Wardens coming out to play and doing well at tanking a massive turn of damage on their feel no pains and things, and then wiping out a huge chunk of the army the turn after. In any case, a massively impressive achievement to beat so many tournament players in a row though. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now. Hope you've enjoyed a quick look at some of the very strongest army lists in Warhammer 40k, and as always feel free to let us know if you know any other insights about the army lists and how they were played down in the comments below. As mentioned, feel free to check out the channel's affiliate discount links down in the video description if you'd like to help support the channel, and of course save money versus the Games Workshop web store as they all do. In any case, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the 40k videos coming just about every day. I'm sure I'll be back in the near future for yet another detachment review. It should be AdMech next. Check out the Patreon page linked down in the video description. That's the main way that I can keep on making these videos all the time. There's a few advantages for that as well, such as names in the credits and seeing certain videos early from time to time. In any case though, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.